A 12-year-old boy stood in the basement of the Louisville Home Show, tears streaming down his face, fists clenched in rage. Someone had stolen his bike, his beautiful red and white Schwinn bicycle that he'd worked so hard to get. But what happened in the next 5 minutes would accidentally create the greatest boxer who ever lived. And it all started because a cop said 6 words that changed everything. It was October 1954 in Louisville, Kentucky. Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. was 12 years old, and he was having the best day of his young life. The annual Louisville Home Show was the biggest event of the year in their neighborhood. Vendors from all over Kentucky came to showcase their wares, offering free popcorn, candy, and trinkets to anyone who walked through the doors of the Columbia Auditorium. Young Cassius had begged his parents for weeks to let him ride his new bike to the show. His father, Cassius Clay Sr., was a sign painter who barely made enough to support the family. His mother, Odessa, worked as a maid when money got tight. That red and white Schwinn bike represented months of saving, months of sacrifice, months of Cassius doing odd jobs around the neighborhood to help pay for it. The bike wasn't just transportation. It was freedom. It was status. It was everything to a 12-year-old boy growing up in the West End of Louisville in the 1950s. When Cassius rode that bike, he wasn't just another poor black kid from a struggling family. He was flying. He was somebody. His parents had finally agreed he could ride his bike to the home show, but he had to be careful. He had to watch it. He had to make sure nothing happened to it. Cassius had promised he'd guard that bike with his life. For 3 glorious hours, Cassius wandered through the home show with his friend. They sampled free popcorn from the Louisville Popcorn Company booth. They watched a man demonstrate the latest vacuum cleaner technology. They marveled at the newest model refrigerators that most families in their neighborhood could never afford. They ate free ice cream and candy until their stomachs hurt. Cassius was happy. Life was good. And then it was time to go home. They walked outside to where dozens of bikes were parked near the entrance. Kids from all over Louisville had ridden their bikes to the show. The bikes were lined up like a colorful parade of childhood freedom, chrome handlebars glinting in the late afternoon sun. But Cassius's red and white Schwinn bike wasn't there. He looked once, then twice. Then he started running up and down the line of bikes, panic rising in his chest. "It's got to be here. I left it right here, right here."
But it wasn't there. Someone had stolen his bike. The bike his parents had sacrificed to buy. The bike he'd promised to protect. The bike that represented everything he had. Gone. 12-year-old Cassius Clay felt something he'd never felt before. Not just sadness, not just disappointment, but rage. Pure, burning rage. "I'm gonna whoop whoever stole my bike," he told his friend, his young voice shaking with anger. "I'm gonna find them, and I'm gonna whoop them good." His friend tried to calm him down. "Cassius, we don't even know who took it. It could be anybody." But Cassius wasn't listening. He was already storming back into the home show, looking for help, looking for justice, looking for someone who would help him find the thief and make them pay. In the basement of the Columbia Auditorium, there was a small boxing gym. Cassius didn't know it was there. Most people didn't. It was just a section of the basement where a local police officer named Joe Martin ran a free boxing program for neighborhood kids. Martin was a white cop in his late 30s who genuinely cared about keeping kids out of trouble. He'd started the boxing program as a way to give young people something positive to do with their energy. That afternoon, Officer Martin was in the gym, wrapping up a training session with some of the local boys. He heard a commotion near the entrance. Someone was crying. Someone was angry. He walked over to see what was happening. There stood young Cassius Clay, tears of rage streaming down his face, fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "Someone stole my bike, my brand new bike, and when I find them, I'm gonna whoop them. I'm gonna whoop them good." Officer Martin looked at this skinny 12-year-old kid all fury and tears, threatening to beat up whoever had stolen his bicycle. Under different circumstances, it might have been funny. This kid couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds soaking wet. But Martin didn't laugh. He saw something in the boy's eyes. Determination. Fire. The kind of spirit that either gets a kid into serious trouble or turns him into something special. "Son," Officer Martin said calmly, "you better learn how to fight before you go around saying you're going to whoop somebody." Cassius looked up at the police officer, confused. "What do you mean?" Martin smiled. "I mean, if you're serious about fighting, you need to learn how to do it right. You can't just go around swinging wild punches and hoping to hit something. That's how you get hurt. That's how you lose. If you want to be a fighter, I can teach you, but you gotta be willing to work."
Cassius wiped his tears. "You can teach me to fight?" Martin nodded. "I run a boxing program right here in this basement. Free training. I work with boys from the neighborhood. You can come by tomorrow if you want. We'll start teaching you the basics. But I'm warning you, it's not easy. It's hard work. Real hard work." Something clicked in young Cassius's mind at that moment. He'd just lost the thing he valued most in the world. His bike was gone, probably forever. But maybe, just maybe, he could gain something even more valuable. The ability to stand up for himself. The ability to fight back. The ability to never feel this helpless again. "I'll be here," Cassius said, his voice still shaking, but now with determination instead of rage. "I'll be here tomorrow." Officer Martin patted him on the shoulder. "Good. I'll see you then. And son, I'm sorry about your bike. We'll file a report, see if we can track it down, but I've got to be honest with you. Most stolen bikes don't get recovered. But if you come to my gym, you'll get something even better than a bike." Cassius didn't believe him then. How could anything be better than his beautiful red and white Schwinn? But he showed up the next day anyway. And the day after that. And the day after that. The Columbia Gym became Cassius's second home. Every day after school, he'd rush to the basement of the auditorium and train. Officer Martin started him on the basics: how to stand, how to move, how to throw a jab, how to protect his face. The early days were brutal. Cassius's arms ached, his legs burned. He took punches from boys who'd been training longer. He went home with bruises and a sore jaw. But he never quit. That fire that burned in him the day his bike was stolen never went out. If anything, it grew stronger. Cassius discovered something about himself in that gym. He wasn't just good at boxing, he was born for it. His reflexes were lightning fast, his footwork was naturally smooth, and he had something else, something you couldn't teach: absolute fearlessness. Within weeks, Officer Martin knew he had something special on his hands. "This kid," Martin told another trainer, "this kid could be somebody someday." Martin began featuring young Cassius on his local television show, Tomorrow's Champions. The show aired on Louisville's local station and showcased the best young boxers in Martin's program. Cassius wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he was the fastest and the flashiest. Even at 12 years old, he had personality.
But Martin wasn't Cassius's only trainer. Another trainer, named Fred Stoner, worked with a young fighter at a different gym, the Grace Community Center. Stoner taught Cassius the sweet science of boxing, defensive techniques, how to slip punches, how to move his head, how to conserve energy. Between Martin's aggressive style and Stoner's defensive technique, Cassius was developing into a complete fighter. At Central High School, Cassius became a celebrity. He'd run to school every morning alongside the bus,
training his endurance, making sure everyone saw him. "I'm gonna be the greatest boxer who ever lived," he'd shout as he ran past the bus windows. Other kids laughed at first, but Cassius didn't care. He believed it with every fiber of his being. His academic performance was another story. Cassius struggled terribly in the classroom. He'd later be diagnosed with dyslexia, but in the 1950s, teachers just thought he was lazy or stupid. His report cards were filled with D's and F's. But everyone knew Cassius Clay could fight. That's what mattered to him. 6 weeks after his bike was stolen, Cassius had his first amateur boxing match. He won in a split decision. The feeling of getting his hand raised in victory, the applause of the crowd, the respect in his opponent's eyes, it was better than any bike could ever be. Officer Martin had been right. Cassius had lost a bike, but found his destiny. Over the next 6 years, Cassius Clay's amateur record became legendary. He won 2 National Golden Gloves titles. He won 2 Amateur Athletic Union national titles. By the time he was 18, he had won 100 fights and lost only 8. But more importantly, he developed the style that would make him famous. Dancing around the ring, hands held low, head moving constantly, making opponents miss and then countering with lightning-fast combinations. In 1960, Cassius Clay traveled to Rome, Italy to represent the United States at the Olympic Games. He was 18 years old, and it had just been 6 years since his bike was stolen. 6 years since he'd walked into that basement gym with tears in his eyes, threatening to fight someone he couldn't even identify. Now he was fighting for Olympic gold.
In the light heavyweight division, Cassius dominated every opponent. His speed was unlike anything the international boxing community had ever seen. He'd float around the ring, make his opponents swing at air, and then counter with perfect precision. In the gold medal match, he defeated Polish boxer Zbigniew Pietraszkowski, cementing his status as one of the best young boxers in the world. When Cassius returned to Louisville wearing his Olympic gold medal, he was treated like a hero. The mayor threw him a parade. Local businesses wanted to sponsor him. The boy who'd cried over a stolen bike was now famous across America. Central High School welcomed him back as a conquering champion, even though his grades had never improved. None of that mattered now. Cassius Clay was somebody. But the joy of his Olympic victory was complicated by the harsh reality of 1960s America. Cassius was an Olympic champion, but he was still a black man in the segregated South. There's a famous story, though its accuracy has been disputed, that Cassius tried to eat at a whites-only restaurant in Louisville after winning his gold medal. When he was refused service, he allegedly threw his Olympic medal into the Ohio River in disgust. Whether that specific story is true or not, the sentiment behind it was real. Cassius Clay was learning that even Olympic gold couldn't protect him from racism and discrimination. That realization would shape the man he would become, the stands he would take, and the name he would eventually choose for himself. Shortly after the Olympics, Cassius turned professional. A group of 11 wealthy white businessmen from Louisville, known as the Louisville Sponsoring Group, agreed to manage his career. They gave him a salary, a car, and training expenses. In return, they got a percentage of his earnings. It wasn't the most favorable deal for a fighter, but it gave Cassius the financial stability to focus entirely on boxing. His professional debut came on October 29, 1960, just weeks after the Olympics. He defeated Tunney Hunsaker by unanimous decision. It was the first of what would become 56 professional victories. But Cassius wasn't just winning fights, he was becoming a personality. He'd started writing poems, predicting which round he'd knock out his opponents. He'd show up to opponents' houses and taunt them. He'd give himself nicknames like the Louisville Lip because he never stopped talking. The boxing establishment didn't know what to make of him. Fighters were supposed to be quiet, humble, and respectful. Cassius was loud, brash, and borderline obnoxious, but people couldn't stop watching him. Love him or hate him, you had to pay attention when Cassius Clay was in the ring.
By 1964, just 10 years after his bike was stolen, Cassius Clay was challenging Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship of the world. Liston was considered unbeatable, a terrifying fighter who demolished the previous champion, Floyd Patterson, in one round. The experts gave Cassius no chance. He was too small, too inexperienced, too flashy. Liston would destroy him. But Cassius had other ideas. Before the fight, he showed up at Liston's house at 3 in the morning, banging on the door and shouting insults. He held press conferences where he'd predict victory and mock Liston's appearance. He called him the Big Ugly Bear. The boxing world thought he was crazy. They thought Liston would teach this loudmouth kid a lesson. On February 25, 1964, in Miami Beach, Florida, Cassius Clay shocked the world. He danced circles around the slow, powerful Liston. He made the unbeatable champion look old and confused. After 6 rounds, Liston refused to come out for the 7th round, claiming a shoulder injury. Cassius Clay was the new heavyweight champion of the world. "I shook up the world," he screamed into the microphone after the fight. "I am the greatest. I'm the king of the world." The skinny 12-year-old who'd cried over a stolen bike was now the heavyweight champion of the world. The next day, Cassius announced that he joined the Nation of Islam and would be changing his name to Muhammad Ali. The bike thief from October 1954 had no idea what he'd set in motion. That single act of theft had created a chain of events that would give the world one of its greatest athletes, most controversial activists, and most beloved figures. Officer Joe Martin continued training young boxers in Louisville until his retirement. He'd occasionally give interviews about the day he met young Cassius Clay, always emphasizing that it wasn't just talent that made Ali great. It was that fire, that determination, that refusal to accept helplessness that he'd seen in that 12-year-old's eyes. The red and white Schwinn bike was never recovered, but in a strange way, losing it was the best thing that ever happened to young Cassius Clay. If that bike hadn't been stolen, he might never have walked into the Columbia gym. He might never have met Joe Martin. He might have become a sign painter like his father, or worked some other ordinary job. The world would have lost the greatest. Sometimes, the worst moments of our lives lead to our greatest opportunities. Sometimes losing something we love opens the door to something we never imagined. For 12-year-old Cassius Clay, losing his bike meant finding his destiny. That's not just the story of how a boxer was born. That's a lesson about how setbacks can become setups for something greater. If this story of resilience and destiny inspired you, share it with someone who needs to know that their setbacks might be setting them up for something amazing. And remember, sometimes what we lose leads us to what we're meant to find. The greatest boxer who ever lived started with tears in his eyes and a stolen bike. What will your setback lead to?